William Earl Tabbitt II has been booked into the Snohomish County Jail on one count of first-degree murder on a warrant out of Skagit County. We took him into custody yesterday around 6 p.m. in Seattle without incident. Today he will be transported to the Skagit County Jail.
39 years ago, two teenagers in love boarded a ferry on a cold November night for the most ordinary of reasons, picking up heater parts for a father who needed them. They were young, they were happy, they were planning to be home by the next afternoon. They were never seen alive again. Their bodies were found 60 miles apart. Two completely different causes of death. One killer, and a strand of DNA that sat in an evidence bag for over 3 decades with absolutely nowhere to go. More than 200 leads. Serial killers investigated and cleared. Anonymous, threatening letters terrorizing grieving families for 23 years. And one detective who made a silent promise to 2 dead teenagers that he was not going to stop. Then a woman who had never heard either of their names uploaded her own DNA to a genealogy website to build a family tree. And within 2 hours, a forensic genealogist pulled a killer's name from a database of 1 million profiles using a method that had never been used in the history of criminal investigation. The arrest that followed left an entire community breathless. If stories like this one keep you awake at night the way they keep us awake, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell icon. Truecrime Exposed drops new cases every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. Like this video, drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from, and let's get into this case. Tanya Van Cuylenborg was 18 years old. She had just graduated high school in Saanich, British Columbia, a quiet community nestled on Vancouver Island along the western coast of Canada. She was standing at that exact moment in life that feels almost untouchable, freshly out of school, figuring out who she was going to become, and experiencing first love. Her father, William, later said that he genuinely liked Jay and Tanya together. He felt they were a great match. He was not worried letting them go. That is the kind of trust a parent only extends when they truly believe their child is in safe hands. Tanya packed her Minolta camera for the trip because she wanted photographs. She wanted to remember it. Jay Cook was 20 years old, also from Saanich. He was the only son in the Cook family. He and Tanya had been together about 6 months, and his mother Leona believed Tanya was something genuinely special to her boy. The reason for the trip was completely ordinary. Jay's father needed furnace parts from a heating supplier in Seattle. Jay volunteered to go pick them up. But the two young people turned a simple supply run into something more. One night away together, sleeping in the Cook family's old van, driving home the next morning with the parts and whatever photographs Tanya managed to take along the way. On the evening of November 18, 1987, Jay and Tanya boarded the first ferry from Sydney, British Columbia, to Port Angeles, Washington. They transferred to a second ferry from Bremerton to Seattle, which departed at 10:16 in the evening. The boat docked in Seattle around 11:30 that night. From that moment forward, nobody knew where they went. No phone calls home. No check-ins. Nothing. The next morning, when the heating supplier opened for business, nobody came to pick up the order. That detail alone tells you something important about who Jay and Tanya were. These were not careless kids. They were reliable. They communicated. They did not simply vanish without a word. By the evening of November 19th, when the couple should have been back home on Vancouver Island hours earlier, the phones at both families' houses were completely silent. Both families reported them missing immediately. The search began. But Jay and Tanya were not in Canada anymore. They were somewhere in Washington state, in a place where their families had no connections, no contacts, and no idea where to even begin looking. The two families waited. They prayed. What was about to come back to them was not any answer they had been praying for. November 24th, 1987. 6 days after the ferry left Victoria, a passerby traveling a rural road near Alger in Skagit County, Washington, saw something lying in a ditch beneath a steep embankment on the side of the road. It was Tanya Van Cuylenborg. She was naked from the waist down. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been shot in the back of the head. Her hands were bound behind her back with plastic zip ties. She was 18 years old. She had been carrying her camera to document a first trip with the boy she loved. And she had been lying in that roadside ditch completely alone for 6 days before anyone found her. That same day, Tanya's wallet and keys were found discarded near a Greyhound bus station in Bellingham, a few miles to the north. The Cook family's van was located in a downtown Bellingham parking lot just blocks away from the station. Inside the van, investigators found what the killer had left behind: zip ties matching the ones used on Tanya, plastic gloves, receipts, and the ferry ticket confirming the couple's movements on the night of November 18th. And there was one item in that van whose significance nobody could yet fully appreciate: Tanya's black pants, the ones she had been wearing the night she was murdered. Those pants would eventually become the single most important piece of physical evidence in the entire investigation. Tanya's camera, the one she had packed specifically to photograph her first real trip with Jay, was not in the van. The killer had taken it. It was never recovered, and Jay was still missing. The Cook family held on. Maybe he was somewhere. Maybe there was still a chance. November 26th. 2 days after Tanya was found. That chance ended. Jay Cook's body was discovered beneath a high bridge in Snohomish County, nearly 60 miles south of where Tanya had been found, near a local correctional facility called the Monroe Honor Farm. He had not been shot. The killer had used entirely different methods on Jay. He had been beaten with a rock. He had been strangled with twine and 2 red dog collars. And in an act of deliberate cruelty that has no rational explanation, a pack of cigarettes had been forced down his throat. Zip ties matching those used on Tanya were found near his body. 2 victims. 2 locations 60 miles apart. 2 completely different causes of death. Same zip ties. Same killer. The same cold and calculated violence running through every detail. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with the words, "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this story all the way through. The investigation now stretched across 4 counties: King, Skagit, Whatcom, and Snohomish. The killer had moved deliberately across the entire region, scattering evidence, scattering bodies, creating jurisdictional chaos at every turn. What he left behind was an unidentified fingerprint on the van and DNA recovered from Tanya's black pants. In 1987, DNA profiling had only been used in a criminal case for the very first time the year before. The science existed, but barely. Forensic scientists were able to develop a DNA profile from the evidence recovered from Tanya's pants. They gave it a designation, Individual A. The profile did not match Jay Cook. It did not match anyone in any available criminal database. The killer had walked away completely clean. Investigators did what investigators do when they have evidence, but no match. They waited for technology to catch up. In 2003, the Washington State Patrol uploaded Individual A's profile to the FBI's National DNA Database, containing profiles from millions of people who had been arrested across the United States. The result came back empty. Individual A was not in the system. If the person carrying that DNA profile had never been arrested for anything, he could theoretically live out the rest of his life completely free, while 2 families on Vancouver Island continued waiting for an answer. Detective Jim Scharf of Snohomish County had by this point quietly made this case his professional mission. In 1995, he helped establish a cold case investigation unit, and the Cook and Van Cuylenborg murders were among the very first cases the team examined. He looked at the file and said what everyone who ever touched it eventually concluded. This is probably the most terrible unsolved case we have. Scharf was not family to either victim. He had no personal obligation to carry this case the way he carried it. But he carried it anyway for nearly 23 years, re-interviewing witnesses, tracking every new development in DNA technology, never truly shutting the file in his mind no matter where his daily work took him. Over the years, more than 200 names crossed Scharf's desk as potential suspects. The two most prominent were Robert Yates and Charles Sinclair, both serial killers who had been active in the Seattle area in 1987, both with histories of violence against women, and both theoretically capable of being in the right place at the right time. Both were thoroughly investigated. DNA testing eliminated both of them completely, each dead, and added one more line to a list that was already far too long. 1 month after the murders, anonymous letters began arriving at the Cook and Van Cuylenborg families. Threatening, terrifying letters written by someone claiming to be the person who had killed Jay and Tanya, taunting two families who had already lost everything. Police pursued these letters alongside the main investigation for years, burning time and resources on a trail they had reason to believe might be real. It was not until 2010, 23 years later, that investigators finally traced the letters to their source. A Canadian man in his 70s with severe mental illness, who had heard about the case on the news in 1987 and began writing the letters for reasons that made sense only inside his own mind. He had no connection to the murders whatsoever. 23 years of investigative energy spent chasing someone who was never involved. An individual A was still out there, still unknown, still free. Then everything changed because of a woman who was simply trying to learn where her family came from. She had never heard the name Jay Cook. She had never heard the name Tanya Van Cuylenborg. She uploaded her own DNA to a public genealogy database to build a family tree, the same thing millions of ordinary people do every year out of simple curiosity about their ancestors. Her DNA, sitting in that public database, happened to share genetic markers with individual A. A forensic genetic genealogist working the case identified that connection and began constructing a family tree around individual A, not from police records, not from criminal databases, but from the voluntary DNA submissions of everyday people researching their own family histories. Working from approximately 1 million DNA profiles in that database, the genealogist identified a name. In 2 hours, using a methodology that had never been applied to a criminal investigation anywhere in the history of the world. That name led directly to an arrest that stunned the community where the suspect had been living quietly and freely for 31 years, since the night he left 2 teenagers dead in separate counties and drove away into the dark. The families on Vancouver Island had been waiting for more than 3 decades. Detective Jim Scharf had devoted nearly his entire career to 2 young people he never met. Tanya Van Cuylenborg had packed a camera to photograph a first trip with someone she loved at 18 years old, and she never got to see those photographs. Justice, when it finally arrived, came from the most unexpected direction imaginable: a stranger's family tree, a 2-hour search, and DNA that had been sitting patiently in a pair of black pants for 31 years. That is what happens when you refuse to give up on the truth. If this story moved you, leave a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from and what case you want True Crime Exposed to cover next. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because justice does not have an expiration date, and neither do we. We will see you on the next one.